So, If was directed by John Krasinski and it stars Kaylee Fleming, Ryan Reynolds, John Krasinski, Fiona Shaw, Louis Gossett Jr., Phoebe Waller-Bridge, and Steve Carell, as well as a whole bunch of other celebrities. And in this movie, a girl is going through a crisis in her life, and as a result, she begins seeing these imaginary friends, the imaginary friends of all these other people, and she realizes that someone else in her life can also see all these imaginary friends. So now they have to work together to try to figure out, like, how to make sure these imaginary friends are saved and such. So this is a movie that, admittedly, I was kind of looking forward to for a few reasons. First off, John Krasinski has proven to be a pretty capable director. I liked his first two Quiet Place movies quite a bit, and I was kind of curious to see what he would do with a movie like this, since it's very different from A Quiet Place, obviously. Second of all, the cast. The cast of this movie is insane. Not only those people that I mentioned, but it has like the voice talents of other famous people such as Matt Damon, Maya Rudolph, Emily Blunt, Jon Stewart. So many people just randomly do voices for this movie, and I was kind of curious to see like what they would all do with this movie. Also, Steve Carell does a voice in this movie as well, as I mentioned, and it's kind of a re-teaming of him and John Krasinski from The Office, and me being a huge Office fan that I am. It's definitely something I was really looking forward to in a way. The trailers themselves looked alright. Like, it kind of looked like it could have been like a nice, wholesome, you know, live-action Pixar movie, which apparently they were trying to go for. And honestly, I was not that big of a fan of this movie. While I can't say that I hate this movie, I can't really say I like it that much either. So, let's start off with the few things I do like in this movie. First off, I do think the actors do a pretty good job. Kaylee Fleming, I thought she carried this movie entirely. Haven't really seen her too much in a lot. It's like, okay, I kind of liked her character in this movie. I kind of like what she's, not necessarily her character, but like what she's kind of going through. I feel like she's doing everything pretty well in the movie, as well as everyone else in the movie. I thought Alan Kim surprisingly stood out as kind of a little scene stealer. I thought he was good in the movie. Everyone else does a fine job. Ryan Reynolds is fine. John Krasinski is fine. Some of the voice actors do a decent job. Some of the ifs I thought were pretty cool was this one dog that's voiced by Sam Rockwell, this private eye that's voiced by Christopher Maloney, a mouse that's voiced by Sebastian Maniscalco, a ghost that's voiced by Matthew Rhys, or Rhys, I don't know what his name is. Some of the other voice actors do fine, like Phoebe Waller-Bridge does fine, doesn't really do much for me. Louis Gossett Jr., who tragically passed away a few weeks ago, his voice work is pretty good in this movie too. Steve Carell, kind of didn't like his character if I'm being honest, but I'll get into that in my negatives. Meanwhile, the design of the imaginary friends is very creative, and I thought they were like filled with so much detail. They were pretty unique and imaginative. It's like, yeah, those are pretty well done. I do think that visually speaking, like, I felt like you don't really get to see the monsters in The Quiet Place, but like here, Krasinski shows that he can be a pretty visual director. So I do think the visuals in this movie are pretty impressive, and, you know, they're so full of details. Like, I kind of want to see more of this. I do think that there's one fun sequence in the world of the Ifs, which is pretty fun. You'll kind of see it's about halfway through the movie. And that kind of, well, that also kind of leads into a negative eventually I'll have about the world building and such. But there's one fun sequence. Meanwhile, the score by Michael Giacchino is good. The cinematography by Janusz Kaminski is pretty good, but like you can never really go wrong with either of them. And admittedly, this movie did make me tear up a bit. Maybe it wasn't, like, entirely earned by the movie, but it did kind of make me tear up, like, not because of what was happening on screen, because it made me kind of think, it's like, oh, okay, I kind of see what you're going through, and I kind of feel the same way at times. But that's not, again, the problem with it is that it's not because of the character's journey, it's more of my personal take on it. And I feel like this movie is a little bit emotionally manipulative, I would say. Pixar has been accused of that, but I feel like this movie kind of does it. It kind of, like, tries to pull at the heartstrings a little bit too much. And let's get into my negatives, which is that, you know, it tries to pull on the heartstrings a little too much. It tries to throw everything at you, including the kitchen sink, about, like, trying to, like, make you cry and such, which is, and I also kind of feel like the cast that I mentioned is just so incredibly wasted. Of, like, why do you have all these famous people in this movie? Like, most of them only have, like, one line. Matt Damon has, like, one or two lines. Maya Rudolph only has a couple lines. And that's only, like, the people I mentioned. Like, Bradley Cooper is in this movie randomly, and you just hear Rocket Raccoon. George Clooney's in this movie. I could just list off all the people that are in this movie, and it would take, like, you know, 10 minutes probably. It's insane. Like, you have all these other people, like Keegan-Michael Key, Amy Schumer. I'm like, what are all these people doing in this movie? It makes no sense, like, why they had to be in this movie. They don't really have much personality. They don't have, like, any reason to be in this movie whatsoever. It's just, like, did John Krasinski just call out a bunch of his friends and was like, hey, can you just do a quick voice cameo for me? Sure, why not? Reads one line, and you're done for the day. Okay, well, that's kind of boring. Also, the world building of the Ifs themselves are not very interesting. You kind of have, like, a few moments in the world of the Ifs, but for the most part, you do see them in the real world. And I kind of thought it was disappointing that we don't really get to see a whole lot of this world. I mean, we do see a lot of it in that one sequence, which is admittedly pretty fun, but I don't think it's really enough. I do think there's a lot of wasted opportunities with this movie, too. Like, at one point, you know, the Cailey Fleming's character, she grabs the camera and is like, so, is she going to record these at some point or something like that? No, it's like, that's kind of a dumb thing. It's like, why aren't you going to try to record these? I don't really understand it, but whatever. Also, I just think this movie is incredibly predictable. It's like, if you've ever seen a movie, you can definitely tell what's going to happen in this movie. Like, sometimes it's, like, pretty obvious. Like, when you see the opening scene, it's like, we know where this is going. We know what's going to happen. And it does happen. And it's just kind of annoying. It's like, for a movie about the power of imagination, about why you should never let that imagination go, even as you're growing up or you're going through a difficult time, ironically, the movie itself is lacking imagination in terms of its story, in terms of its characters, in terms of a lot of things, really. I just felt like this was just kind of a well-intentioned, I don't want to say misfire, but it was just kind of a odd movie that was just put together. I won't say this is like an embarrassing movie where it's like, you know how like you have like a movie like Cats, which is like everyone at Cats should be horrified and disturbed, and everyone else was disturbed by watching that movie, and they should be like ashamed of like doing that movie and such. It's not on the level of that, where it's like, it's so bad it just needs to be seen to be believed, but it's just a movie that's just so forgettable, if I'm being honest. Like, hardly anything in this movie, I don't want to say hardly anything in this movie works, but hardly anything in this movie is imaginative. It's not really that well thought out. I feel like it is thought out, at the same time it's not. It's a movie that I feel like, again, it tries so hard to tug at the heartstrings and such, that it doesn't really understand like how you get there. It's just more like the effect rather than the cause. So even though there are some decent performances from the cast, from the live action cast and the animated cast, some of the IFs themselves look pretty cool. The score, cinematography, the one cool sequence in the IF world, and also, admittedly, it kind of did make me tear up a bit. I just feel like it was just a huge of a waste cast. The world building itself was pretty lackluster. It's pretty predictable. It lacks imagination. There's so many wasted opportunities with some of the characters, and I just felt like maybe this was an idea that should have been stretched out a little bit more. But since it's a, just barely an hour and a half movie, it's not going to. So I'll give If 2 out of 4 stars, stream it. So, what's your favorite movie with a huge cast in it? Comment down below, subscribe to the channel. This is Pat. Stay safe.